Welcome back to Confront Your Mind. I'm Jolynn,
I'm Tiffany. Join us as we talk about how to confront the uncomfortable in life,
while also allowing space for laughter as we learn. All right, today's topic may be obvious in theory, but difficult in practice. It is that feelings are not facts.
That's true.
And that facts are not feelings. But yeah, I think that's although it's obvious, it is definitely, I think, a little bit more difficult to practice because it's one thing to know that that's true, and it's another thing to implement it into your life. And so that's what we're going to talk about in today's podcast. Is kind of
we're going to get into it.
We're going to dive right in. We're going to go down. Let's do synchronized swimming. Ready? And yeah.
And Jolynn's going to do our mindfulness tip of the day.
So the mindfulness tip of today of the week is circles of control. It's actually, I think it's a therapeutic intervention to be specific. But it's one of my favorite ones because
That's exciting.
As a girly whose number 2 value is control, it's a good one to have in your tool belt. But basically what it is, it's actually also an interactive tool, is that, and Tiffany's going to post a picture of it, but
I'll put it up on the screen.
Mm-hmm. But so there's going to be a big circle, and then there's going to be a smaller circle on the inside. And on the smaller circle on the inside is going to be things that are in your control. And on the circle, in the bigger circle on the outside is going to be things that are outside of your control. And so just to run through a few examples real quick of maybe what you would write down. And you can use this. I actually really love to use this for specific situations, but also for life in general, is you can put down on there what's in your control is how you respond to your feelings, my reaction. Right, that's something I will always put in, what's in my control? My reactions, what's in my control? And what's outside of my control is how other people respond to me, right? Or Tiffany's feelings, or literally everything else.
I was going to say that, but I didn't want to.
Right. Well, and then in the example too, you can see other specifiers they put in it that make it a little bit more soothing. But off of the top of my head, I think the one that I always go to is they're truly the only thing that's in our control is our reaction to our things. And then when we write everything else that we're worried about in the circle outside of the smaller circle, so the circle that represents what's not in your control, it actually is really calming, I think, and very reassuring to be okay, those are literally things that I couldn't even control if I tried.
Yeah, it takes the responsibility off of you. That's cool.
And so that's one of my favorite things is to be mindful of what is in your power, what is in your control, and to try to focus on those things instead.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah. So before we, as always, we're going to start with a definition, but today we're going to do 2 definitions. And Tiffany's going to take us away with the first one.
Yeah.
I've just been saying take us away a lot today.
Take us away.
Just fly us away.
So I'm going to define feelings. So the definition I found was an emotional state or reaction. But in the definition right below that, I really liked, it says a belief, especially a vague or irrational one, which I thought was hilarious because I'm that's kind of part of what we're talking about. And just in general, a feeling, if we think of our feelings as facts, a lot of times a feeling we have isn't a rational thought or a rational feeling. And so I thought that was interesting. So do you want to define facts, or
I'll actually
do we want to talk about feelings for a second?
Let's stick with feelings for a minute.
Okay.
So I do want to say too, sometimes it's difficult to know what you're feeling. And that is especially if you're a more logic driven person.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times what I see is people are very much split. There's deep feeling people or feelings kind of people, and then there's facts and logic people. And so that's why it's really important to know the difference, not just because there's different kinds of people, but it helps you understand the greater spectrum of people, right? But sometimes it's really difficult to know what you're feeling. That's one of the things I talk a lot about with my clients is well, what if I don't know what I'm feeling, right? And I think being able to be aware of it, and if you're having trouble sitting down and figuring out what do I actually feel about this, I want you to get into a grounding state, do some deep breaths, like work through it, process it. And when I say process it, I also mean like kind of, excuse me, I burped. I also mean like getting into your body, right? And like sitting with the feelings. Because a lot of times too,
Like
the
feeling
reason.
your feelings.
Exactly, feeling your feelings, not just thinking of your feelings, right? And so a lot of the times too, like when we feel things deeply, we're feeling them in our bodies, right? Well, it's like a body map. Like, you know, a lot of times, like for me, I feel my anger in my chest or in my fist. I feel
It's a little
true.
scary.
Yeah, girl. That's why my parents got me a punching bag at 13. So, you know, and then when I'm happy, it's like all over. And then when I'm sad, it's like a lot in my shoulders. So it's also kind of like getting in tune with your body and where your feelings are in your body is one of the ways to do it. And then there's also like journaling. I know that's like a lot of like, it sounds like it's up here, but it's also getting it out of here and like into the world and like on paper. And I kind of like to think about it, and I know this is not accurate or true at all, but like I like to think about it as kind of like to get it out and onto paper, it has to like bypass your heart. And so like
That's
it kind
cool.
of
I
picks
like
it up
that.
on the way out. And so when you're journaling, it kind of goes by the heart and like checks in with the heart before it leaves. And it's like, oh yeah, don't
I
forget
like
to
that.
add that detail, right? And so it also kind of lets you slow down enough to really like process what's going on. But yeah, I think just making space for the fact too that like feelings are not always easy to understand, and if you're not understanding your feelings, you're not failing, you're not a failure. There are ways to get to that like resolution, and it's just like being gentle with yourself, taking it slow, maybe like going and talking to a therapist or like talking to a good friend, you know, somebody that you trust. Journaling. I know some people like with exercise, like they can like process a little bit easier in their bodies when they exercise. I know for me, like meditation is one of the ways like I really process my emotions. So being able to just like sit and lay down and just like let my body exist in the world, that helps me a lot. Yeah, those are kind of like the big things I think about when I think about how to get into your feelings. Get into those feelings, getting in the feelings, feeling the feels. But also to being aware of the language we use around our feelings, right? So I know we talked about this a little bit in our last podcast of like I feel statements, especially in confrontation. And feel free to join like if you have any examples. But like some examples of like I feel statements is like I feel sad, right? Like we're not saying I feel like blank, right? That's not a feeling. Once it becomes I feel like blank, it's a thought, it's not a feeling, right? Because you're thinking about what it feels like, and that's
Yeah.
not a feeling.
And sometimes too, you can go. I know. Did you already talk about the feelings wheel?
I think so. Maybe not,
But
but
like that's kind of along with the feelings wheel. That kind of just shows like more specific is like something that my mom, like if I'm telling my mom that I'm like angry or I'm sad, like there's a few big words that we tend to like use a lot, and then like she'll ask me like, okay, but like what's behind the anger or what's behind the sadness. And a lot of times, like especially if I'm angry, like I'm like nothing, it's just anger. But if I really take the time to think about it, like I'm hurt or you know, so I mean sometimes you do just feel angry and that's fine, but a lot of times I feel like we are only familiar with a couple of feelings, you know, and it's
yeah.
just like I'm either angry, sad, upset, like just these very common words. And so I think sometimes it's good to like practice, you know, you can even still include like I feel angry because I feel hurt, but like looking, you know, past like what's behind that big word emotion and like what's a lesser, you know, like what do I have to figure out, and like it helps you understand your feeling.
Yeah, I like that.
So that's helped me a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, is like digging into it further. But yeah, so that's kind of like using I feel statements and letting them be like feelings and only feelings, you know, digging into emotions more and like kind of what's going on there. Yeah, that's kind of like my big things is like let feelings be feelings, you know. And I think I like always harp on this, but if you're saying, and Giannis and I do this to each other when we like are in arguments or like talking, not just arguments too, like even when we're talking to each other about like something, if one of us is like, well, I just feel like she didn't listen to me last week. And Giannis would be like, that's not a feeling. And I would be like, oh, no, that's true. Like, you know, or like
that
if
is good.
I'm talking about him, I'd be like, I just feel like you don't see me. He's like, that's not a feeling. And it's like, it can be really frustrating at first,
Yeah.
but having somebody, I know for me and Giannis, having somebody like each other to hold each other accountable was actually really helpful and kind of reinforced that idea of like feelings are not facts. Like feelings are not thoughts. Like feelings and thoughts are two different things. So
Yeah, that's really helpful. I like that.
right.
But yeah, do you want to define facts?
I can get into it, or do you want to do it?
I can define facts.
Get into it.
So the definition I found was a thing that is known or proved to be true. And then the other definition that I found that I also liked was the truth about events as opposed to interpretation. So that kind of like helps with the, you know, like it's a fact. It is something that is true. It's not like what you interpreted it to mean. And I think that helps with that.
Yeah, I like
But
that.
how do we know a fact is a fact?
Yeah,
Jolyn,
that's a great question.
take us away.
I think it's also like knowing what is true at the barest version of what happened. A lot of times it's like stripping away all the judgments and emotions from a situation. And I wish I would have put down an example of it. But it's like without judgment, emotions, or assumptions in it either. So,
Well, I feel like the thing that I think of first is that like kind of like what you were saying, like stripping away assumptions, judgments. So like just saying I think quotes like help me with that because it's like if you had a conversation with somebody and like they said, you know, I am mad at you, and that's like all they said, then, you know, remember that. Remember like the fact, like what was actually said. What did my ears actually hear? Like, I am mad at you. Like, did my ears actually hear like I don't ever want to see you again? Like, did they hear, you know, stuff like that. So it's like, is it something that you are taking what somebody said and assuming or judging what they said and thinking of what they might be thinking?
Right.
Or is it like the literal words that your little ears heard come out of their mouth?
Right, yeah. And it's like truly stripping it down to that. It's like at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Like if you're trying to differentiate facts and feelings and trying to get into the facts, it doesn't really matter what you felt when somebody said something, right? Because we're not at that point yet. We're just at like what happened, right? Because we're going to get into the feelings. But first we need to figure out what happened and then go back and assess the feelings, right? Because it's like if like Tiffany told me like, get out of my house, I don't know. I have such a hard time with like the feelings versus facts examples because it's like I'm just thinking of straight facts because my mind struggles to make up those like things. But if you were like, get out of my house, or if she just told me get out of her house, right? Like that is like a fact. She told me to get out of her house. And now if I like go home and I'm like, wow, like, you know, I think she said that in like a kind of rude way, or like, and maybe she just had something to do today. Like those are all like assumptions, and I'm trying to figure out what it was instead of just letting it be like Tiffany told me to get out of her house. Like that is all that happened.
Or like going to me and asking me like,
Right.
hey, why did you ask me to get out of your house?
Right.
You know, you can explore there. Like,
Right.
just wanted to dig a little deeper. Why'd you do that?
And if you're curious on how to confront that situation, check out our last pod on healthy confrontation. But yeah, no, you can definitely explore. But it's also too, like, for me, as like, I know with somebody like, you know, with like anxiety a little bit, like my mind runs 90 to nothing after stuff like that happens. And I'm like, or it used to, because I've really worked on like not, I think for me, a lot of the times feelings are not facts comes from assumptions.
Yeah.
And so being able to be like, nope, I'm assuming Tiffany's mad at me. Like, I'm assuming she had to go somewhere. I'm assuming she doesn't want to hang out with me anymore. When in reality, like, maybe what happened is that, like, her husband was coming home and she just wanted to spend time with her husband. Now, Tiffany has never told me, get out of my house. Right. But,
No,
like,
I never have.
you know, but it's also, too, like, letting the fact of it just be, she told me to get out of her house. That is it. Like, if I add anything else to it, like that is emotion, or that is a judgment, or that is an assumption, right? And sometimes it's really hard to stop yourself and be like, no, like that is all she said. And I like everything else from that is extrapolation, you know, so.
That's a good word.
Extrapolation as defined.
Give me the Merriam-Webster for that one.
I forgot to look it up. It's like adding on to it, making it more than what it is, I think. But yeah, so a lot of the times too, and if like, I know, I feel like we talk about conflict a lot, but I mean, it is literally confront your mind. But a lot of the time when we're like in confrontation too, whether I'm with like other people or if I'm with like clients too, I'll even say like with fact statements, I'll say, I know, right? Like you say, I know, right? Or like, let's see. I'm trying to think of an example. Sorry, guys. I'm just struggling on the examples
You're giving
today.
good ones.
Okay, thank you. Oh, that was nice. Grocery store. Here we go. Like, if I go to the grocery store and I buy apples, bananas, and oranges, and then I come back, but I didn't get my bananas, right? My bananas are not in the bag. I can say, like, I know I bought apples, bananas, and oranges, but where are my bananas, right? I have the receipt. It says bananas were purchased, right? So anywhere from there is like, I know I bought apples, bananas, and oranges. I know that the bananas are not on the kitchen counter when I come home. Literally, I am missing my bananas. The bananas are on the receipt, right? Anything outside of that is an assumption or judgment, right? Maybe I left them at the store. Maybe I left them in the car. Maybe they fell out of the bag in the parking lot, right?
But you don't know.
But I don't know, so it's an assumption, right? So that's like another thing is like, I know that I bought apples, bananas, and oranges. I have a receipt to prove that I bought apples, bananas, and oranges, but I am missing my bananas. Where are my bananas? Where are the bananas? But I think that's like, that's a silly example, but I know too, like another one that I do a lot, especially with couples, I'll say, like, I know Tiffany mentioned this in our last podcast, is like saying like, I know that, or like you said, I want to like have a healthy relationship with you, and then talk about like the confrontation or the conflict of interest. And then, but for sometimes I'll also tell my couples is like, I know that you love me, right? Like if you're going into a hard conversation with your partner, sometimes it's really like intelligent. I am going to say it's intelligent to like start with what is true, right? Your partner loves you. I'm assuming this right now, but like I'll use my relationship. I know Giannis loves me, right? And even though we have like disagreements sometimes, or like tiffs, or like little arguments, or like blah blah blah, you know, like little spats, like I still, like, even this morning, like, Tiffany saw, like, he brought home pigs in a blanket, and I really wanted a powdered sugar donut, and they didn't have it.
Where is my powdered sugar donut?
And I was like, where's my powdered sugar donut? And he was like, they didn't have any. And then, like, I don't know what I was saying with that, but even then, like, if it had turned into something more than just, like, us, like, you know, kind of being silly with each other, I could have addressed him and been like, hey, like, I know that you love me, and I didn't like the way you spoke to me when you told me you only had pigs in a blanket. There was actually nothing wrong with it. But too, it's like kind of like, I know that you care about me, and I didn't feel loved. Right?
Yeah.
Or I know that you care about this relationship, and I need like this behavior to change. Right?
Yeah.
So those are like my other I know statements, are like, I know that the groundhog didn't see its shadow.
I'm very excited about that.
Yes, so excited. Me too. I cannot wait for warmer weather.
I know.
But it's also kind of like being able to do your research too, you know, like don't speak on things that are not true, like that you don't know of, and only do what you know is true, right? So like if you saw like somebody drop a pencil, you're like, I know that she dropped her pencil, right? That is true. And from there, anything else would be assumptions, right? So just even when you're like telling your story back to yourself, like check yourself. Be like, is that true?
I think too, like kind of like your circles of control or whatever. I feel like you could maybe if you're having a specific scenario that you're finding that you are up in your head about, or you can't figure out, like, okay, what's going on right now, and you need to like really get it written down on paper, you could just do like columns, like feelings and facts, and like say a statement out loud and be like, is that a feeling or is that a fact, and like categorize it, and then you could like read your little list and be like, okay, here's my facts, and like, not that the feelings don't matter, because they do, but it's like, and whenever you're actually trying to figure out a scenario, that way you would have your facts written down.
Right, yeah.
And, like, you can differentiate the two. So sometimes I feel like writing helps a lot.
Definitely, yeah.
And I've never done that about the feelings and the facts, but I think it would be a good thing to do.
Yeah, I like that. It was kind of like a pros and cons list, but, like, changing it to feelings and facts, which I think is honestly a little bit better, too, especially for your own self. Like, if you're like struggling with something internally, you know, what actually happened, what am I feeling, you know, and exploring that. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I like that.
But I think one of the things when we're talking about what are like feelings are not facts, right, is how to deconstruct facts and feelings, right? And so I think a lot of it's about building awareness. So like kind of like what Tiffany just talked about is like having that self-awareness to know you're struggling with something and then taking it upon yourself to act on it. And then even Tiffany said this earlier when we were preparing for the podcast. She said, everyone is their own person. The right way for you, this is you, might not be the right way for me. And that's like that. Like, you know, one of those other things I think about a lot too, and with couples a lot too, I talk about how even though we know that our partner really well, or even with like best friends or family, like, you know, like these people really well, but you do not know what their brain is like, right? Like, you can probably predict a lot of things, and like that's super cool, but never forget that you're not that person, right? They have their ability to change on their own, to make their own choices, to have different wants than you do. And sometimes I think like when we're really close to people, we kind of forget that they're not an extension of ourselves and that they're their own person.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And then kind of going back up to that circles of control thing too, and deconstructing facts and feelings, is I really do think like letting go of control is like a big part of separating facts and feelings.
Yeah.
You know, like realizing too, like a lot of the time facts are out of your control. And if you're trying to make facts work for you, then you are manipulating the truth. And that is wrong. That is wrong.
No, it's true, though.
It is.
And facts are very out of your control, because facts are, like, the truth of what happened. And, like, I feel like we kind of try to use our feelings to make facts into, like, what we want them. But it's, like, the truth is that we can't do that. And the fact is the fact. And the fact is what actually happened, not the way we feel about it. And sometimes a fact is harder to accept.
Yes. I actually just had a good example pop into my head.
Let's hear it.
So if you're playing dodgeball, right? And
okay. That's not what I expected, but all right.
If you're playing dodgeball,
brought me back to elementary school there.
And somebody throws a ball at you and like they hit you right in the face, right? The fact is that you got hit in the face with a dodgeball. Right? And then you go to the sidelines, you have to wait till somebody catches the ball and puts you back in, right? But you're like gossiping with your girls on the sidelines and you're like, I swear that Jenny hit me in the face on purpose because I stole her man last week. I don't know. And like all of that is just not true, right? That's not a fact. That's a judgment or assumption or a feeling.
Jenny's just playing dodgeball.
Jenny's just playing dodgeball. Like, stop putting that on Jenny. Like, maybe she did, but like, like, good aim, Jenny. But like, you know, like that's like, I think that was like I was like, oh, that was good in my head. But you know.
But it makes sense, though. Yeah, like you're just assuming, you're also assuming the motivation behind somebody else's actions.
And you will never know.
Whereas all you know is, like, what they did to you.
Yeah, all you know is that you got hit in the face with a dodgeball.
Which is the game you put yourself into.
Right, exactly. And you can say, like, man, like that, my feelings were hurt when Jenny hit me in the face with a dodgeball, you know?
But we don't know Jenny's intentions.
But we don't know Jenny's intentions.
Can you do me a favor?
What?
Can you on your phone look up who wrote this book that I'm about to put in quotes from? So I can credit them?
Yes. Did you leave your book downstairs?
I did.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like focus on what's in your control, and I think it becomes a little bit easier to process the difference between facts and feelings.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's this book. I have it right downstairs, but it's called Designing the Mind. And I tried to mention it actually in last week's podcast. We were talking about healthy confrontation. I slightly mentioned it and I called it the wrong name, but it's called Designing the Mind, The Principles of Psychotecture by Ryan A. Bush. Thank you.
I gotcha.
So this is a great book that talks about like cognitive distortions and applying our feelings where they don't belong. So I'm just going to read off some quotes and, we can talk about them as well and kind of what that brings up. But so the first one is memories do not neutrally depict events as they happened. I love this quote because whenever, like, memories are often very emotional, right? Whenever somebody asks you, like, oh, what's your favorite memory? Or what, what's your worst memory, right? We're not going to talk about the worst one. But, like, if somebody asks me, like, what's my favorite memory? Like, one of my favorite memories is whenever me and Bradley, like, walked the whole beach in Nicaragua. Mm-hmm. And we were not dating at the time. That's beside the point. Sorry, that just made me laugh. But if Jolyn asked me about that and I wanted to tell her about it. I remember that
day.
I wouldn't sit there.
I was there with them, but not walking with them.
I wouldn't just say, like, oh, my favorite memory, me and Bradley walked the beach in Nicaragua. Like, I wouldn't just say that. Like, that would be the fact, right? That's the only fact there is about that.
Right.
But I would have been like, yeah, I was feeling this way, or, like, it was a great time. Like, you know what I mean? I would, like, go into further detail talking about the way that I felt. Mm-hmm. Or, like, the way that I was perceiving things or whatever. And so it's, like, not, like, an actual memory is actually just the facts, but often, like, our memories are not neutral, right? And that's because we have bias. Mm-hmm. And so the book does a good job of defining bias. So biases are reflexive inferences which invalidly flow from premises without our conscious awareness. So, almost, I like that it says without our conscious awareness because a lot of times, like, subconsciously we are inserting our emotions. So it's like we don't even realize that we're doing it. We think that we're just telling a story, right?
Right. It's because, like, our feelings are so true to us. Like, we feel feelings so deeply, but we don't have that same response with facts.
You're right. Like, imagine the last time that you were, like, venting to a friend about, like, the person you're dating or the person you're married to or a friend, another friend, or your parent. Like, you didn't just tell them facts. Like, think about when I vent to you. I don't just tell you, like, the straight facts. Like, I'm like, and this is like... I'm not even
imagine?
I'm not going to go into it. But,
Can you imagine, though, like, if it was just the facts, like...
It'd be so much more healthy for
honestly.
You'd be like, oh, okay, well, that's not that bad,
Yeah.
Maybe that's what we should start doing. Like, be like, okay, but what are the facts? Like,
we can explore the feelings, but we should also explore the facts. Yeah.
But it is true. Like, but seriously, imagine the last time that you're venting to somebody. Like, you definitely included more than what was said and more than the facts.
You were like, and I bet she just thought that she could do that.
Right, exactly. Like, you start going into your feelings, and it's like a subconscious movement. I feel like you don't even, like, think of them as separate. They flow right together.
Well, even, too, I feel like our brains try to understand when things happen. And when it's not, like, when it doesn't make sense to us, our brain elaborates on it. It's like, what actually happened?
And you're also, like, trying to, like, validate, too. Like, you're trying to validate yourself. So if, like, you're telling somebody a story about what somebody else said, and it doesn't seem like, when you hear it come out of your mouth, it doesn't seem like that bad, then you find yourself, like, coming up with, being like, well, and the way they said it was like this, and then, you know what I mean? And so
he knows that I don't like it when he talks to me like that.
Exactly. Like, you add things to, like, validate, your feelings. And so that's
hilarious.
Yeah. But anyway.
I do want to say, too, because I really I just really love this point, is that, too, that, like, feelings are actually, like, very, like, emotional, like, hormonal. Like, it's, like, feelings interact with the brain in a lot more of, like, a hormonal and, like, neurotransmitters are released when experiencing feelings. And so it seems more powerful than facts. Like, facts don't really trigger...
Yeah, like, emotions are so powerful. Like, they're strong.
Exactly. And I think it does cause so much of your brain chemistry to, like, alter and change and shift, right? Whereas facts... they can trigger similar responses, but it's not going to be the same, right? Because our brain can't really feel facts, right? Like, I mean, you can sometimes, but it's not going to be as significant as like the emotions we add into the facts.
That's actually had that written down.
What?
You and Brian or whatever his name is are on the same page.
Should I?
It says like these feelings are experienced in entirely different brain regions from our rational faculties. So it's like emotions are processed in a totally different part of the brain.
I feel so validated right now.
Look at you go.
I am smart. Am
She's
I
smart.
a genius?
Absolutely. So it continues to talk about biases, which I really like because I never thought so much about like cognitive biases until I read this book. But it talks about like specific biases, and so a couple examples are like he talks about frequency bias and like how just because you have experienced like so say that you have dated 4 guys total, right? In your life, and say that, take it back to when you've only dated like 3 guys. Say that you're gonna go on your 4th date, and say that 2 of those dates went really poorly and 1 was like amazing. So when you're going on your 4th date, you're more likely to think it's gonna be bad just because like you experienced like 2 bad dates and 1 good date. So like instead of being positive and being like, you know what, like maybe this one will be good too, your brain tells you like, because I've experienced a bad date, this date's probably going to be bad. So it's like, and I feel like we do that with a lot of things, but that was just the quickest example I could come up with. But we think like because it has happened more frequently, even if it's just slightly more frequently, that's the more likely scenario that's going to happen.
It reminds me of our Motivations and Routines podcast where we talked about how your brain is like a data center, and it like stores data and it remembers it for later. And so you have to make a conscious effort to like work against, like, especially if there's a lot of negative data, right?
Yeah.
You have to actively work against it to
like it can
increase
be
the
good and
positive
bad,
data.
but sometimes it can cause like negative distortions.
Yeah.
And then he talks about the recency bias, thinking that just because something happened most recently, that's the most likely result. Because we often like, you know, our emotions are closest to the most like recent things that have happened,
Yeah, because
right?
it's more real.
Yeah, so it's like we think of that, and so then if something's coming up that relates to something we just went through, we're like, oh, same thing's gonna happen, which is like not necessarily true if you're thinking about like actual statistics and odds. So just lots of different biases like that he talks about that I found helpful.
I even have a personal example with that. Is like recently I had a panic attack 2 weeks ago actually.
I'm sorry to hear that. I wasn't laughing at
I was kind of laughing at the way I said it. It was not fun at all. Panic attacks suck. But I did have a panic attack like 2 weeks ago, and it was like the first one I've had in a really long time, and I forgot how scary they felt. And like I was shaken up for like 3 days after it happened. Like I was like not okay. Or I was like okay, but I like did not feel okay. I almost felt like I was instantly back where I had been when my panic attacks were like twice a week, like really, really bad. And I was like freaking out. I was like, I'm gonna go back into that place. And then like as I like moved on from it, I had a hard time like being like, no, like this is actually shows a lot of improvement. Like you haven't had one in a long time, and all this stuff and positive self-talk. But even in like the following week, like even like the day that marked a week exactly from the panic attack, I like felt my body like almost like reacting again. Like there was like a time where I was like just sitting and not doing much, because that's like usually when my panic attacks happen, when I'm just like existing, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, the world's gonna end someday and I'm gonna go with it. And I mean, now I laugh about what I panic about, but in the moment I'm like totally convinced like a meteor is gonna hit the earth right at this very moment, and I'm like, and what would you do? Like, what would you do, Jolyn? Like,
put on your Superwoman cape.
Right, like, what are you gonna do, girl? Like,
save the whole world.
You don't have, like, you're gonna die. And it, like, but the recency bias is, like, standing out to me because of how recently I had that panic attack, those feelings of fear were stronger than they had been in such a long time, just because of like the recent panic attack I had. And I was sitting there and I was like almost like freaking out because of like that bias I had, because like I like had just experienced that. And so it took a lot of like, that's not true. Like, you had one panic attack, like, and so.
Which you were then telling yourself the facts. Like,
Exactly.
you know, like you could have, then you probably said, like, okay, I have gone this long without one, and I had one, and that is true, but I also have not had one for all this time. And so you're stacking up the real facts and, like, telling yourself that you're not likely to have one again.
Yeah, amen.
So good job to you.
Thanks.
Just deconstructing the recency bias.
Deconstructing that girl. But it also shows, too, like, my fear was so huge around it. Like, it took me, like almost a whole week to really like get past it and like be like, I'm okay. Like, I'm not where I was like 2 years ago. A year ago. It was a year ago. I'm not where I was. No, it was 2 years ago. No, it was a year ago. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I'm just not back where that like bad period of my life was.
Yeah.
You know, and I also have to be aware too of like February is like a really like hard month for me, like because a lot of things like have happened in the month of February throughout my life. And so I was like, you know, this, like the truth of the matter is like these events have happened. It makes February more difficult. I had one panic attack. And it's not the like end of the world. Like what matters is that I overcame it quicker than I have in the past. It's been a long time since I've had one, and I'm human. Like, you know, all of those are facts. Even though that fear was very real. Like, give me one person who loves to have a panic attack and we'll talk. But, like, I don't think that person exists. Like, you know, like, that fear is real. Like, that fear is so real and, like, creates panic disorder. Panic disorder is literally, like, the disorder of, like having panic attacks because you're afraid of having panic attacks because that fear is so real.
Yeah.
But... Yeah. So
that's a really good example, though, of recency
thanks.
bias.
I just thought of that.
Yeah, that's great.
Just like my mind works like that.
So I'll read this quote that includes the one about the brain processing.
Yes.
But it's kind of long. But anyway. So there may be some things you just know are true. If someone asked you how sure you are, you would answer 100%. But the truth is, the feelings of absolute certainty we have about some things are completely independent of the actual property of truth. These feelings are experienced in entirely different brain regions from our rational faculties. We determine what we are sure of intuitively, and then we use reason to justify it. And I love that part because I feel like, again, with the subconscious like mind, I feel like we you know, like, if we say, like, you know, this person hates me, and you have nowhere to found that on, like, I would tell you, you know, hey, I think so-and-so hates me, and you'd be like, oh, like, why do you think that? And I could probably tell you, like, 20 reasons, but not one of them would be, like, that doesn't make that person hate me, but I'm just trying to, like, give reasons to justify my feeling.
I like that word, justify.
Yeah, so that's like the way I think of it, is that like we do that probably a lot more than we realize. You know, coming up with our truth that we strongly feel, like we feel like it's true, and so we are trying to think, okay, well, how do I justify that that's true? But it's not like you think of it like that. We're not thinking we're justifying, but we are without realizing it. So that's what, I don't know, that stands out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I even like too the what you said too. But the truth is, the feelings of absolute certainty we have about some things are completely independent of the actual property of truth. And I like how he said the truth is that the feelings are independent of the truth.
And I like how he said feelings of absolute certainty, because like that just shows how strongly we can feel that we know something and it cannot be the truth, which is really hard to admit, but it's like, it is true. Like, you can completely tell yourself, like, I know this is true. I know that I know that I know this is true. And it still could not be true.
Right.
It's and that's such a hard thing to, like, admit and remember.
Yeah. And it almost initially feels like you're playing the fool. Like, you're like, I'm just fooling myself here. Like, I know, like, too, like, when I first started to, like, deconstruct feelings from facts, I felt like I was honestly being a little bit of an idiot because I was like, I know my husband, like, because Giannis is my closest person, or like, I know my husband, I know when he's mad, I know when he's upset. And the truth of the matter is, like, by saying that, I'm assuming his feelings for him instead of giving him the opportunity to develop them for himself. And so I think it's like, that's why it's so powerful to ask and like have the ability to confront last week's episode, and, you know, just like get like real with somebody about it and be like, no, like, actually, like, although I know Giannis really well, like, and I know the way he looks when he's happy, and I know the way he looks when he's angry, the truth of the matter is, like, unless he clearly communicates to me, like, Jolynn, I am angry, or Jolynn, I am so happy, like, I don't know.
Yeah,
like,
you don't know.
So.
And that's something that he actually touches on in the book, is he says something like how, he talks about how we have all experienced, like, the disorienting feeling of learning that something we were sure was true is not. Whether it's, like, a negative or positive way. Like, we've all had a moment where we're like, oh, wow, like, that is definitely not what I thought, you know? And I think what it was is he was talking about how disorienting it is because, like, it's so shocking because we were so sure, and it's so shocking to realize that, like, we actually don't know,
Right.
So that was just interesting.
I like that.
But another quote is, even when we genuinely want to think and see clearly, our desires and emotions dominate us beneath our awareness, which again is just saying, like, if somebody asked you, you would say, yeah, like, I want to know the facts, I want to know the truth. But then, like, the way that you feel about something or your emotions can, like, so easily override, like, your want to know the actual truth. I feel like I was gonna sneeze.
Bless you.
Okay, I think it's not coming.
If you press your tongue to the roof of your mouth, it'll make it go away.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Still might. Okay, I'm just gonna stop. But yeah, so I mean, I feel like a lot of times our emotions are so much, like, have such a hold on us, and they can dominate us from underneath our awareness.
Right.
But something that I found really helpful, and this is the last thing from this book, is just, like, questions to ask yourself that he included. And these are very straightforward and good questions. So the first one is this thought realistic? So this is kind of whenever you're in your head just thinking something that you might, like, know is true in your head, that you think you know is true. Is this thought realistic? Like, is it a realistic thought? Is it an irrational thought? You know, would be the other option. And then, am I basing my thoughts on facts or on feelings? What is the evidence for this thought? Which I love that, because, you know, actually finding, like, do I have evidence to believe that this is true? Or do I just strongly believe it just because? You know, like, do I have the proof? Like, you talked about the receipt for the bananas. Like, if you came home and you're like, I know I bought bananas, but you looked at your receipt, or, like, you know, and it wasn't on your receipt, and you were still like, no, I did, I know I did, then you'd have to, like, I would argue that and be like, I don't think that you did. Like,
right, like, it's not on the receipt.
If the bananas are not there and you have the receipt of proof, you can say, like, no, look, I did, and I'd be like, oh, yeah, obviously you did. Like, there are things that are, like, inarguable,
right,
like you were saying earlier. So it's like, you know, do I have the evidence? Do I have the receipt?
Yes.
And then, am I viewing a complicated situation as black and white? Which, that's interesting too, because sometimes I feel like not so much, like, I feel like honestly men are, like, more, this applies to them more, because, like, men do look at things, like, so logically and so, like, right or wrong, black or white. Most men, excuse me for generalizing. Sorry to all the men listening to this. But sorry. But, like, I feel like that would be, like, the one thing that would apply, if all of this, the one thing that might apply to my husband more than me would be, like, you know, like, are you taking something that might be a complicated situation and just thinking of it as, like, it's either this or it's this, or, you know, like, there might be deeper levels to it. And then, am I having this thought out of habit, or do facts support it? And that one kind of talks about the whole, like, recency bias or frequency bias, probably the frequency bias, like, thinking, am I just, like, thinking that something is the way it is because it's happened so many times to me in the past, or is this real? Because I think we have the sometimes we have the habit of thinking like, yeah, my life is just gonna like the same negative things are gonna repeat themselves. And then sometimes we like manifest that, I feel like. And then it is gonna keep happening, you know, like we talked about self-sabotage in the past. Like sometimes you are like, okay, like this is just another crap relationship, and then you like you don't try, and then you self-sabotage, and then you prove to yourself like you said with the story and data, like then there's another penny in the piggy bank of like a bad relationship. Yeah. But it turns out that it wasn't necessarily, it didn't have to be that way.
No. Yeah, and even like you were saying too, it's like the piggy in the piggy bank, you know, it's like you set yourself up, the way you think about things sets yourself up for the way that they're going to be, kind of. Like, I mean, within reason, right? Like your thought process and the way you think about something actually does have a lot to do with like how you're acting on it and like the subconscious message you're telling yourself. Like if you're telling yourself like, I can't do this, like I'm too weak. Like that's something I probably tell myself, like I'm too weak to like do arm workouts, right? And when I tell myself that, I don't even bother trying, like because I'm just like, no, I'm too weak, right? Whereas like if you change it to like, maybe I'm strong enough, or maybe like I'm too weak, but I can still try, right? You know, like,
or like since you said like I am too weak, like you could say like I feel too weak to do this workout, but you know,
right? Like even the way I just said it, like I am too weak, like that's just a feeling. Like I'm actually not weak. Like I'm actually I'm relatively strong, depending on who you ask. And yeah. I'm not the strongest girl in the group, but I'm definitely probably not the weakest. Just depends on who you ask.
Depends on what the definition of strong is.
Mentally, I'm very strong. Physically, I'm probably in the lower percentile. Especially with arm strength. Same. My arms are just, okay, anyways.
It's fine. That's not our topic right now.
No. Well, maybe we'll talk about how weak my arms are.
Maybe that'll be next podcast
whole podcast episode to Jolynn's weak arms.
Maybe during the episode we can just like be lifting weights
entire time.
Yeah. Should we start a workout channel?
Ooh, that'd be fun. Just working on my fitness. The podcast is my witness. That could be a really good way to get it. But yeah. So through all of this, though, I think we've talked a lot about like what, like the differences, feelings versus facts, like really digging into it. And then I also want to emphasize and kind of wrap it up with like how important it is to know the difference between feelings versus facts. Yeah. Because being able to differentiate between your feelings and your facts is like a crucial piece to living a life of satisfaction. A lot of the times too, like when we live based on judgments and biases in our heads, we're not living in the truth. What?
I'm sorry. You said biases.
I really struggle with that word. Biases. Kind of What's wrong with the way I said it though?
It's biases.
No.
Yes, it is.
No.
It's ES, biases.
It's biases.
Why would it be C's?
Ease. Biases.
Why would it be called biases?
Ease. I have 2 pairs of E's. Biases.
Do you say...
Not biases.
I didn't say that. That's not what I said. Nope. What's something that ends in...
Ease.
Do you say processes?
Yes.
The processes.
I say processes.
What?
Do you say processes?
I don't say it like that, but I say the processes.
What? The processes.
No.
Oh. I'm crying.
What's something else that ends in S? Like, it's like whenever S becomes plural. You don't put...
That's not in S, though.
No, like the word bias ends in S.
Oh.
And then you're saying multiple of them?
ES. I say... Ease.
I know.
Fees. Fees.
That's not the same at all. That's just adding an S to the word fee. Like, oh man. What's the word that ends in S?
I'm thinking of words that cannot be like pluralized.
Well,
Made plural.
but it's like... There's not a
I
lot...
don't even remember what I was talking about.
I'm sorry.
Biases.
You were talking about biases.
Biases.
And
We should do a poll.
we will, because it's definitely... Comment below which one you say.
Yeah, who's right? Even though that's exactly the opposite of what we just talked about in our confrontation podcast. Let go of being right.
I am correct.
Biases. I don't even remember why I was saying biases.
Um,
Like, because you have your own biases. And so, you lie. Yeah, so it's like you've got to live in the truth of, like, life. Because if you're not living in the truth of life, you're just living a lie or you're living a fantasy world. And it's not actually, like, that's not healthy.
yeah.
And so I think that's why it's so important to differentiate between facts and feelings, because it really does let you like live in the truth of the world and become your most authentic self as well. Because you're not denying your feelings by acknowledging the facts. You're just
Right.
allowing yourself the freedom of differentiating the facts from your feelings.
Well, and that's what, like, we talked about in last week's episode about confronting, like, healthy confrontation in other people mainly. But, like, that's like, a healthy way of confronting yourself. Like, confronting your mind, if you will.
Oh, what was that?
Confront your mind.
Oh my gosh, I love that podcast.
But yeah, no, you're confronting your own mind and you're confronting your own self, and like that's a healthy way to do it too, because that's something I do want to point out is like it's not that you're like we've not once said that your feelings aren't important or that they don't mean anything. Like your feelings are still there to like your emotions are there to like help guide you or like what feels right and stuff like that. But all we're saying is that like they're not facts.
Right. And that's not an insult. Like don't be getting over there all offended, but offended. Don't be fiended.
But yeah, so I mean I agree. I think they're very important.
Yeah.
But that they're not factual.
No.
And yeah, so that's important.
Yeah, I think too, like going off of that as well, like just like Tiffany said, want to emphasize like nobody's telling you that your feelings are not important. Like if anything too, like if you've listened to this podcast before, you know that we like are big on validating feelings. But it's also one of the important things too is like it's actually really empowering to be able to differentiate between feelings and facts, because it allows you to take responsibility of your feelings too. Like if your feelings are constantly tied into the facts, then it's harder to take responsibility of those feelings, because it's not, you're like don't want to acknowledge if that's true or not, right?
Yeah.
It gives yourself that freedom to live authentically, but it also gives yourself the freedom to take ownership and be aware of what's in your control, like the mindfulness tip of this week, and have that and be responsible for that. Like those are the few things that you get to be responsible for in this life.
And I think too, like sometimes your feelings, yes, they're valid and they are just, that's what they are, is they're your feelings. But sometimes whenever you do like challenge yourself to think of a situation, think of the facts, like what actually happened, what actually was said to me, what are the actual facts of this event, sometimes it can help you to like clear out some of your feelings. So like if you're feeling really, like I said in the beginning, like say I'm feeling really sad because I'm feeling really hurt by something that I've like thought up in my head, but then I think about the facts and then I'm like, wait, I actually like was not thinking of this, quite factually and correctly. And now that I actually think of the facts, or I've talked to somebody about the facts, I'm not hurt anymore. So sometimes not that your feelings were ever like invalid, but sometimes they're just based on something that you thought up in your head. And so they can be like challenged, and you can get rid of them sometimes and feel better.
Yeah. It reminds me of that quote, like, you're hurting your own feelings. Like,
Right.
I love that. It's like one of those things where they're like, don't go stalking his Instagram too much because you're going to hurt your own feelings. Like, that was a big thing when we were in high school.
I mean, I know I've like, not
Or
that, but
college.
like I've fallen victim to like, you know, like hurting my own feelings by
Oh,
like coming
yeah.
up with a scenario, you know, and like holding off on talking to somebody for so long that I've like come up with a whole entire story that's like inaccurate.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've both done that. We like talked to each other about it. We won't go into personal stories there.
No, not yet. Not today. Maybe it'll be like some Patreon exclusive content. But I think it's like one of my favorite things too, is like with facts versus feelings, or like being like knowing that your feelings are not facts. It also kind of makes you take responsibility for your feelings and like how you got there.
Yeah.
Which I think is really empowering. But
Makes you trace the steps.
Exactly. But initially it can kind of
Whoa.
feel like, oh. I know like the first time I like had ever done that, I was like, oh, so that was all up here.
Right.
And it's like,
yeah.
you feel kind of silly, but I think it's also like, you're like, oh, so I actually have like control of my feelings. Like, that's actually pretty cool. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have control of your feelings, but you have control of how you respond to it. And so
Yeah.
like, if you're feeling sad, right? Like, you can say, I feel sad, right? Because XYZ happened, or because like I dropped my book, right? But you don't have to make up this whole scenario or validate yourself on why you feel sad. Like, you can just let yourself feel sad.
Yeah, that's true. I like that.
Yeah. But that's like, I mean, that's just one of my, like, I think facts are not feelings and feelings are not facts. Like, it's just a crucial
They're very
part.
separate things, but
Yeah.
we tend to
Kind of lump them
put them
together.
together.
And I think it's probably something that's not talked about a lot. I think it's a phrase that's used a lot, but isn't really explored in detail.
Yeah.
And I know that's one of the reasons why Tiffany and I really wanted to like touch in on it and like get jiggy with it. Na 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 na.
Is that what we did?
Yeah. Na 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 na. Get jiggy with it. Do you know that song?
I don't know.
Okay. But anyways, so yeah, it's just like one of those things that I think is really important, especially for like enjoying your life, like being able to like take back some ownership and take back control over like what is in your power. And like what is in your power is taking responsibility of your feelings and also acknowledging the facts of a situation. And one does not negate the other.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. That's a wrap.
That's the wrap.
All right.
So next week,
Yeah.
we'll be talking about
The value of certainty.
the value of certainty.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Thank
tune
you.
in for that one.
And thank you for listening today.
Yeah. And if you liked this episode, then remember to like, comment, share, subscribe,
Woo.
share with everyone. And we are Confront Your Mind on all platforms.
Confront your mind.
TikTok, Instagram, all the things. And of course our YouTube.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, I forgot to mention it on last week's episode.
Yeah, you
but
did.
okay.
I noticed it though when I put it back in this one.
But we have our email, confrontyourmind@gmail.com.
Yeah.
If you have any comments or any hate or any
No, keep your hate to
ideas-
yourself, please.
keep it in. Or any ideas for future topics you'd like to hear.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Remember that we are all learning.
And don't be afraid to get confrontational this week.
Keep it cute until we meet again. Again, again, again. Keep it cute until we meet again. That was my synchronized swimming.
You and I don't have a cup. High five.
High five.